Three. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Snap Note Tap Podcast. I am Joe Cardinal, and today we are joined by a special guest we've been trying to get on for a couple of weeks now, all the way from the great state of Hawaii, Jason Godwise. Hello, Jason. Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome too, Hal. Thank you.
Now, I got to let everybody out there in Radio Land know that Tony is not able to join, which is kind of a last minute emergency came up at home. There's some issue. Everybody, I think, out there knows that his mother is going through some health issues and something came up. So if you're out there, definitely please add your thoughts and prayers towards Tony and his mom. So we're going to be missing him on this podcast, but we're going to forge ahead because we've been waiting forever to get Jason on here and hear his stories, and he'll regale us of his training days and all the things of his life. But before we get started, of course, we have to do our plugs. So, of course, if you're looking to help or support Tony and support Catch Wrestling, the number one thing you can do is join his Tri-C program. And really, it's the best for Tony, and it's the best for, I think, the students, because you get, honestly, a ridiculous amount of access to Tony and his videos. So you get all his videos just to start with on day one. You can basically come out and train at his house. He's got a gym in his basement. You can train, and he puts you up at his house. Which is awesome because you have access to him. So even after you're done training, you kind of hang out with Tony, which we talked about is just like an unparalleled opportunity for those who are really interested in the history of Catch and all his stories of growing up in the rough streets of Cleveland. Beyond that, you have ongoing video lessons with him. So he does customized video lessons. He's doing that with his current Tri-C store, where he films answers to their specific questions. So it's customized training to your needs. I don't think anybody else for that price offers what Tony's offering. So obviously, it's the best for you and it's the best for Tony if you can do that. Obviously, it's not something everybody can afford. So if you still want to just pitch in, please consider our monthly membership. There's two levels. One is just, basically kind of a $5 a month donation deal. It's kind of like, supporting your PBS station or whatever. You're just pitching in like for the cost of a Starbucks coffee, saying, hey, I enjoy the podcast. I watch videos on YouTube. I'm learning from Tony and I want to support him and his teaching. So that's a great way to say a thank you to Tony and keep him going. There's a second level, which is only $10 a month. And that there's regular videos that he films for that are new. So we're producing new little short video clips and instructionals that he puts up there pretty much every month. So you have access to that. Both are great options. Either is greatly appreciated. So let's get on with the show. That's enough for the plugs. This is the first time I'm actually meeting Jason. We just talked for a few minutes before the podcast, but I'm really excited to meet you and hear your story. Jason, welcome.
No, thank you. I said it was kind of interesting. Get here it's quite early in Hawaii time, so
yeah, I appreciate you getting up for that. So although I don't feel bad for you since you're living in Hawaii, that's got to be awesome.
It's better than most people realize, and not for necessarily the same reasons. The little things, and I'm a Midwest guy. I'd cut through, I'll try to hold my phone in there, but I'd cut through this much ice to go ice fishing. I went out in the, when it was snowing, I could see the animal tracks. I'd go out hunting. I love the cold weather in the Midwest. And when the corn was picked out of the fields and you're walking through and the crusty ice was happening and, those type of things. But you're in Hawaii now, and not only are the winters better, but the summers are better. It's almost never really on a miserable hot day in the Midwest and muggy. It's dang near 100 degrees, 100% humidity, and the air's not moving. And a bad day in Hawaii, it's 85 and the humidity's rather low and there's a breeze off the ocean. That's the miserable summer. And then the miserable freezing winter is maybe 70. Might get, when it gets down to 68, 69 degrees, the kids are wearing long sleeve hoodies. And and so it's funny that the people in Hawaii have a temperature range of comfort of about 5 degrees. At 73, it's getting chilly, and about 77, they want the air on. It's a real it's a real example of how people adapt to different environments. Whereas in the Midwest, I remember being in college in the Midwest, and I was wearing flip-flops in the snow because my feet weren't on the ground, just like I wouldn't necessarily wear gloves and things and shoes. I was at a skating rink here in Hawaii, and they had the inside of it cold, and I was like, oh gosh, it's so freezing cold in here. And I would never have done that, but I've been here for so many years now that my blood thins out quick. And the other thing that's nice is because it's always nice, you can have the windows open and a fresh breeze. So it's amazing. The air's fresh. You can always walk around barefoot in a t-shirt. It's always motorcycle weather. It's always jump in the water weather. It is. They don't call it paradise for nothing. I tell people, if aliens captured humans and put them in a zoo, they would put them in a climate like Hawaii.
It makes sense. That's a zoo I'd want to be in.
Yeah.
How long have you been in Hawaii?
Let's see now. It's about 10, 11, 12 years. So as time goes on. So yeah, it's over 10 years.
I was thinking about what you said about like how you adjust the temperature. What sucks about it too is that like it takes you, at least my experience is it takes you a while to get used to the cold. So like, and then like in the middle, some days we'll have weird random, like in Chicago, we'll have a random day in January where it hits 60. And it's like almost like you lose your adaptation to the cold for a few days. It's like all of a sudden my body's ready for spring, and it's like, and it's amazing. Yeah. But normally, like after the first few weeks where it's like 20 degrees or lower, the minute it gets up to 30 or 40, you're like, oh, this is beautiful. I can't believe it's 30 degrees out. And you're just walking around, like you said, in the hoodie or whatever. And like but the first time it hits 40 in the fall, it's like the world is ended. You're like, oh my God, what the hell? How did I survive this? And that's when like I start making plans, like, how can I move to Hawaii? How can I move somewhere south? Why do I do this to myself every year? It's like you forget the lessons because spring is so nice. But you're right too. We also get it coming and going because summer now, at least lately, the last decade or so, July and August can be miserable. It used to be that we'd get like 2 weeks of real hot weather, or maybe August would be bad, but now we were getting like 90 degrees in September here. Just, like that kind of August weather has been creeping further and further. And yeah, it can be rough on both ends of it.
Well, and that's the thing. Hawaii is not only better in the winter, it's better in the summer because we don't have those oppressive summer heats. And as you just said, I agree with you that there's times in the summer, like July and August, it's just people hide indoors in the air conditioning. And that's almost as bad as hiding indoors in the winter to get warmer. So if you have
absolutely
bad climate on both ends, where it's too cold or too hot, and that's why it's kind of really nice. I'm an outdoor person. I love to be outdoors. And just to be able to go out and walk around barefoot 365 days a year is better than I thought it would be.
That's awesome. Well, I'm completely jealous. I'm going to need to come out and stay with you. Do you have a tri-seed program for yourself? Because maybe I'll join up.
Hey, look here. Here's my mat in my garage, my weight bench, my maces, my kettlebells.
Wow.
This is my throwing pad for Greco. So yeah, I've got my wife's punching and kicking pads, and my weights and my trap.
That's a nice setup.
So yeah. In fact, this mat is triple matted. This wrestling mat is a mat, and then a mat underneath it, and then pads under that. So you can land on it pretty hard. Of course, as you get older, you want your knees and joints still soft and
tell me about
flexible.
So how did you get started training? Let's go through the story. What's your origin story?
Oh boy. I was for me, I guess I just kind of grew up I guess I've always been attracted to it. There was never a place to train. I went to a very kind of my mom, a single mom. My mom and dad got divorced, and I kind of went to a really bad inner city school in the south side of Indianapolis. There just was nothing there. There was not a wrestling team. There wasn't a football team. There wasn't, I mean, it had nothing. It was, it's since been condemned. It, I would, I don't know. I would guess of my 8th grade graduating class, because I went to one of the grade schools there. I don't know that a single person went to college, and I bet half of them dropped out and didn't even make it to a high school. And then my high school probably brought in nearly 1,000 freshmen and probably graduated about 300 seniors, where 700 just got dropped out, was bad. And that school has since is gone now. It's kind of taken over. So there wasn't a real great program, but I just love it was really drawn to I don't know, manly activities and things. And I read, and I read a lot. And I was just really, I tried to get that. So as soon as I could get to a chance, I joined the wrestling team. I tried to learn, I was in the days of the old karate movies like Bruce Lee and that type of stuff. So I always wanted to learn to fight. And I admired the boxers and things like that. And there was the PAL club, but that was really too far for me to get to it. I would try to go there and learn to box, but it was a struggle if I could try to catch a ride with somebody. So I really, and the wrestling team of my high school was just horrible. The wrestling coach had never wrestled. He'd never been on a mat in his life. He just kind of a nice guy that coached wrestling so that somebody would. And I remember my freshman year, the team won 3 matches, probably lost 20. It was like 3-20. And the guy didn't know how to wrestle, but he was a good dude. He just was trying. He would actually read books. He said, I learned how to wrestle and then he would we learned this drop step double that was horrible, and this sit out that just would get you killed, and we'd get slaughtered by all the other teams. But I actually, I said, okay, I'm going to learn to wrestle. And I figured out that if I would just keep moving for 6 minutes, I would wear out the other guy and I'd eventually win. That was just one of the things. So I said, okay, I won't get pinned. I never got pinned. And I would just keep struggling. And I won a lot of matches, and there was kind of a freaky thing. And at that school, and I struggled, and I actually read books and tried. And so I didn't really learn to wrestle. I went to nationals and was on the alternate on the world team, and as a high school kid, but I really didn't know how to wrestle at all. And I tried to learn to box, but same thing. I tried to do it. And it was just kind of a struggle, but there was something inside me that just burned to the desire to do that. I didn't really have, I've never had a coach in my life. I've never had anybody teach me, really. That's one thing I kind of admired Tony, because by the time I met Tony, I had learned a lot. I'd gone and I trained with Rickson Gracie. I went and met him at a seminar, and he was tapping everybody out, and we tied into each other, and he went 10 minutes and couldn't tap me. And it's on film. Yeah, that was early in the Raw days. He said, wow, I will help you in any way you want. I'll help you. You need to fight. And this was, of course, later on, but after I'd been through college, because I didn't learn to wrestle probably till I got to college, because there was a guy, James Tannehill, super good wrestling coach, skilled guy that taught me a lot of moves. And then I learned, and I tried to learn from everybody. I guess I have a huge thirst for learning. I grew up in, I grew up really some ghetto trashy, the cheapest apartments on the south side of Indianapolis that they had. And in those days, they had the traveling encyclopedias. There was no internet. And everybody that had a kid would, if they wanted this, they would buy their kid a set of encyclopedias. A traveling salesman would sell encyclopedias. And that was a kind of a big deal in the 70s. And I would go through, and people would always get kicked out of the apartment, move out, and they would throw these encyclopedias away. So I collected encyclopedias out of the dumpster. And I had full sets, or nearly full sets, of probably every encyclopedia. I had my room full. I had cinder blocks, and I put boards across them and made bookshelves. And I would go through Encyclopedia Britannica, Encyclopedia Americana, World Book. I remember all those encyclopedias, and I just read them cover to cover on everything, just trying to study and learn. I really had I'd go to the library, and I would actually have a laundry basket and you could get as many books as you want. So I kind of did that. And so it wasn't just fighting. Fighting was a small piece of my life, but I just was always trying to self-actualize and become more. I really wanted to grow and become more of a human being. And fighting, I appreciated that more than other things, combat sports, even before there was MMA. You know, I said boxing and wrestling, because I said, you know what, this takes the strength of a power lifter and the endurance of a marathon runner and the strategy of a chess master, and you have to remain calm. And you know, I heard somebody say once, like, golf is the most mental game in the world. You have to putt, and you know, it's so much pressure on you. And I said, that's crazy. I said, no one's going to rip your arm out of the socket and punch your teeth down your throat while you want even the crowd quiet while you're putting. Have people screaming at you while you're trying to figure out which move. And then he did it. You know, I said, I really appreciated that the combat sports take the most. They really measure who you are, and they're the best way to grow and apply. So that's what attracted me. So I wanted to learn. I wanted to box like Gene Tunney. I wanted to wrestle like Dama from India, or Hackenschmidt. I wanted to be able to do all of those things. And so they would, I wanted to throw a left hook like Jack Dempsey. I wanted to have a punch like Ernie Shavers. I wanted to, have footwork like Muhammad Ali. I wanted to think like Einstein. I wanted to go out in the woods like Daniel Boone. I wanted all these things. And I think the best crucible to really develop that was the combat sports. So that's kind of what drove me. And a lot of people that know me, I have a guy that took over the coaching from the high school after I graduated. He said, boy, if I'd had you, we would have done this. Cause I wanted to win an Olympic gold medal. I went down when I was I think I was a junior, and Bruce Baumgartner was at Indiana State. And I got down there and watched him in the regionals, and I stood next to him and I measured myself up against him. And I was like, I think I could take him. That's kind of crazy. And Tom Zupancic was the strength coach for the Indianapolis Colts, and he had a gym. Before that, he was on the world. He was an alternate for the world, for the Olympic 1980 Olympic team. And I went to his gym and I challenged him to a match. And I was like 16. I was maybe 15. And I think so. I always wanted to learn those things. I went out to Rickson Gracie school in California, and I slept behind a dumpster in an alley. There was a couch that somebody had, and I shoved it behind there, and I stayed in his classes. And then I met a guy. He let me use his apartment and kind of took mercy on me. But I took his classes from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. with every black belt, trying to learn everything. This was early in the 90s, so I had a lot of knowledge before other people early on. And then, when Mark Coleman, when he won he was heavyweight champion of the world, I was lucky. He was only about 3 hours from me. And I went out and trained with him. And Mark Coleman's the greatest guy in the world. I mean, he's like, yeah, stay in my apartment, train. And he was champion of the world. I mean, he just was like, hey, I'll help you out. Sure. We went to Ohio State Wrestling Room, which is the Hammer House, and trained there with people. And Dan Severin was at Coldwater, Michigan. He was only about 3 hours from Indianapolis. I drove up and stayed at him and trained. And he was, and so I just really desired to learn from everybody. And I stayed humble, and I stayed in good terms with everybody. And that's one reason I ran across Tony. And I said later on, I would do that to everybody. I'd go to Japan. I'd say, hey, what's your best move? I'd say that to anybody. What's your best move? What do you like best? And I try to catalog those. And I put all those moves in a computer. I have a laptop, and I have in the guard, everything you can do in the guard. Have the guard, everything you can do when you have the guard. In cross mount, everything you can do. Have cross mount, everything you can do. And Tony's one of the few guys I've run across that's sort of that same mindset, because he'll pick your brain. Josh Barnett's like that also. Josh Barnett, he's a real student that people don't understand. Funny guy also is like that is Tom Erickson. He was only an hour from me, and he's at Purdue. And that guy's, he should have been multiple time UFC heavyweight champion, but nobody ever was afraid of him. He was just such a monster. But he's also very smart. So that's why he's a very successful coach now. You look at him and you're like, wow, this guy's so big, so strong, but he never relied on his physical domination. He was a mental thinking guy. Josh Barnett's like that. And Tony's like that. He's always looking at, hey, how does this work? And a real student of the game in those ways. So maybe I was a little too wordy, sorry, but that's kind of, I got started from a desire in my own heart with absolutely no help from anybody except those people that came in later as I forced my foot in the door with them. And then they were pretty kind. But as a youngster, probably till I was 25 or something, I never had anybody take me under the wing when I was young.
Wow, I've got like a million follow-up questions. That's a lot of great stuff to unpack.
I tend to talk too much.
No, it's great. It's great. It's like, but gosh, it's like I should have brought a pad of paper and write down. Oh, I go back and ask about this because I'm sure I'm going to forget. Because as you were talking, let me start back with high school. So you said kind of the situation described was kind of like the coach was someone who didn't have a background but was trying to help the kids out and kind of research as he went and help the kids. But you still made it to nationals in that situation.
When I would go to state in the high school and everybody got beat at sectionals, and I was kind of by myself, and I never had anyone in the room to train with, really. I mean, and and I don't like to say this because it sounds like excuse, but I went to the National Sports Festival or the Nationals or Grand Nationals and things, and they would put little bios about us, and I'm looking at all these kids and they're like, yeah, I started wrestling in the first grade or the second grade or the third grade. I'm like, God, I never touched a mat till I was in high school. And I never really, I never even learned how to wrestle till I had people so frustrated. I had referees that would grab me after a match and say, hey, you need to learn to wrestle. You could do this and this. And these are matches I won. I think in my whole high school career, I lost maybe 7 matches. And I mean, I won a lot, but first thing I did was, okay, I'll never be pinned and I will be there and eventually I'll pin you or I'll outscore you. And then I was like, okay, I got to hold the guy down. And I didn't have a takedown really. I had a great sprawl, so no one could take me down. So, and so it was just the most elementary way I started this. And I wanted to build and grow on it. But the coach, yeah, he didn't know anything about wrestling. I mean, he really didn't. And he was a great football coach. He could have been he played football in college, but he didn't get the football job. And he was a nice enough guy to not be, take his ball and go home. And he coached wrestling. And so I played football and I coached, I went into wrestling because I was trying to, back then kids did sports. It's kind of unfortunate now because they sit and they game all day, but at least I at least had some teams at the school.
Yeah. So it sounds like almost out of sheer athleticism, you're winning. I mean, like without any technique, which to me implies some real amazing natural gifts, because I mean, there's, obviously that's got to take something to compete at even a state level with just kind of a handful of techniques and just being able to wear someone down for the length of a match. That's really impressive. Were you maybe not technical wise, but were you always kind of working out and like, I don't know, as a kid doing push-ups and running and that kind of thing?
Not really. I was, oh dang, I have on my phone here. I should probably show you a picture of me in the fourth or I'll show you a picture of me as a 14-year-old because I have a picture of my high school. I don't know how to do it on the phone. Wrestling, but yeah, it was probably just pure athleticism. Athleticism is people don't understand. Like athleticism is a term that encompasses a lot of things, but there's only about 6 things that determine athleticism. One is just raw strength. There's just your horsepower. And I never touched a weight room. I never touched a weight until I got to college because my school didn't even have a weight room. My high school didn't have a weight room. My middle school didn't have my grade school didn't have a weight room. So K through 12, I'd never touched a weight, but I looked like I lifted weights a lot. There's raw strength. That's just, like I said, your horsepower. And a 300 horsepower engine can beat a 400 horsepower engine if it's geared right in a car and everything. And then there's speed. There's just raw speed. And both strength and, like you can take somebody that's this strong and work out and get them this strong, but you can't take somebody that's this strong and work them out here. There's tendon insertions and ligaments thickness and things that you can make, but there's some people with natural strength. The same with speed. There's also endurance, like McConnor Gregory shown. There is a component of endurance that's genetic. Dave Schultz, I believe, said, why he won the gold medal? Because they went from 3 3-minute rounds to 3 2-minute rounds. He said, I just didn't have that in me no matter how hard I trained. So there's strength, there's speed, endurance. There's also the will to win. Like when you're out there, will you keep fighting? And a fifth thing that's, as Bobby Knight said better than anyone else, the will to prepare to win is vastly more important than the will to win. Mm-hmm. And those two traits are not they're not the same. I've had fighters that would die before they quit on a mat, but God, they wouldn't make it to practice the next day. They when the fight was happening, they would never quit. They would die before they tapped. They die before they gave up. But to come to practice and prepare for it, they wouldn't necessarily do it. And then I've seen people the other way. I've seen people that would make it to practice every time. They had the golden work ethic, but they really didn't have that killer instinct, that deep gameness, I guess what you would call pit bulls in the fight. And those are 5 traits that we put in athleticism. And then there's a 6th trait, which is the most difficult to explain. It is, I call it savoir faire, being at the right place at the right time, but it's kinesthetic awareness. It's a peripheral vision. It's a rhythm. It's a timing. It's a balance. It's
like agility or.
Well, it is, but it's a combination of, and I don't know, because I'm thought of this, but I haven't really thought about it deeply. So maybe I'm missing one. I'd like some of your listeners out there to tell me what I'm wrong about, but I think those are the only 5 things or 6 things that have, but it's the guy, it's like a BJ Penn, that where his nervous system's just, and it's not just faster. It's his nervous system is just, when you throw the punch, he just moves 1/4 of an inch and he misses by it. He doesn't move 6 inches out of the way. He knows where 1/4 inch is enough. He is at the right place at the right. And somebody once said this about me. I've had a few people say, just go in a wild scramble because you'll wind up on top. It's that idea that, if you throw 2 guys in there in the wild, crazy scramble, the one that'll always seem to move his body in the right way, and he may not be the strongest or the fast, but he's got a kinesthetic awareness to be at the right place, at the right time. And it's a rhythm, it's a timing, it's a balance. It's one reason I think jumping rope is so great. I think jumping rope is a great training technique for many ways, but one thing is I think it helps your timing, your rhythm, your balance. Great. The other thing about jumping rope is it forces you to concentrate and keep your timing when you're exhausted. If you go run and do road work, you can plod one foot in front of the other, no matter how exhausted you are, no matter how clumsy you are, no matter how mistimed you are, your feet can go blump, 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 and be out of time. But as soon as your timing fails at jumping rope, you miss it. So it forces you to be sharp, timing, rhythm, balance, coordination when you're exhausted. That's one reason why jumping rope is, you can have people fighting for $100 million and they're using a $5 jump rope because it is one of the greatest training tools. And so, and you can write those down, and I'd like you to, if I'm missing something, I'd like you to tell me. But I think those traits, and I was real fortunate to have sort of those traits. I had a lot of natural people say like farm boy strength, and I was real flexible. I could put my leg behind my head. I could do I was the most flexible guy on the team, and I had real good balance, and really I could jump rope real good, but I didn't have access to a weight room. I didn't have access to a coach to show me moves. And I just kind of wanted to learn, which is, I think, one reason why I've continued. I think now I'm an old man now, but I was like, I could still, if I fought myself younger, because I've learned more. 2 days ago, I was in the jiu-jitsu gym, and I was working with a guy, and one had an outside heel hook and another had an inside heel hook, and an inside heel hook usually beats an outside, but the guy had the outside one in such a way that the guy on the inside couldn't turn. I'd never seen that before. And I was like, wow. And I'm looking at it and analyze, because a lot of kids say they're wrestlers, and whatever they learn from, say, age 10 to 20, the average person will stop. And then you say, well, what did you learn from 20 to 30? Well, not much. You learn 90% of what you do from 10 to 20. Well, I want to be somebody that learns as much from 10 to 20, and I want to learn as much from 20 to 30, and I want to learn as much from 30 to 40, and from 40 to 50. I want to improve every year. And some people just stop and stagnate. So I think I kind of got started very late, but I also think it's kind of kept me. And that's one reason I really appreciate Tony, because he's one of the few guys that's still a student of the game and still, learning, where there's a lot of coaches that maybe don't, they don't progress. I have a prejudice for young coaches. And I will say that with a disclaimer that some old coaches are also open-minded, young-minded, and flexible. But some people they're using old moves that they haven't progressed. If you have a 50-year-old coach and he's coaching the same way he did when he was 20 or 30, there's no reason he's not benefited from his experience. Now, I'm not saying every old coach isn't. There's some that are phenomenal. Like I said, Tom Erickson, it looks like Cale Sanders. He's just an amazing coach. I mean, he's putting together people, and he's not stopping with his ankle pick headlock that he used in college. He's really, and I don't know him, so I'm talking about him third hand, where everybody else I'm talking about first hand. But it looks to me like, wow, he's stayed open-minded and progressive and still going on. So you want to make sure you have that. They always call it a growth mindset or something, but yeah, you're constantly a lifelong learner of things.
Yeah, and you got to I think it's kind of a love of it, like it just, you love to see new things maybe, but you're absolutely right. I think certain people, they kind of plateau at a certain age, and or they get stuck in old ways, and they're not open to seeing new ways of doing things. And obviously, I mean, I was just thinking about how different jujitsu is now as compared to in the 90s, different, just how they're opening up to leg locks and stuff that maybe what they were doing in catch and things before. But yeah, it's interesting because, I did a little bit in the 90s, and now I'm getting back into it with one of the friends, one of Tony's students, another Jason. He has a school, and it's like, wow, this approach is very different from what I remember, how we're being taught. It's a moving target. It's not the same old.
Well, yeah, if you went back to boxing in the John L. Sullivan days, they're doing this, or basketball in the 30s when they have the two set jumps, it's completely different. I mean, you took anybody out of any fighter now would not get caught in the triangles and arm bars that Rickson Gracie did in the 90s. It just wouldn't. He wouldn't even make it through many gyms now. And I'm not insulting him in any way. He was a pioneer. He's a good guy. I mean, I like him. And I get along with everybody. So but I'm not insulting him in any way, but it's just like what people did in the 90s it's progressed so much. And I think, that was one of the things, and that was a great thing. Like the argument people said, because I remember, and said, I'm old enough to remember, like in the 70s, every city with 100,000 people across America had a yellow book, a phone book, and there would be Master Don, a 7th degree black belt in this deadly art that can kill anybody. And it was all fraudulent. They couldn't fight at all. It was all fake. And everyone bought that hook, line, and sinker. And it was like Aristotle with science. He said, well, gravity, we didn't understand that. Everybody just took what he said about things, say, like heavier objects fall faster than lighter objects. And everyone believed that for 1,000 years until one guy finally dropped him off a tower and looked. And so everyone believed that. So it was amazing when they finally did the first UFCs, where they invited, hey, you kung fu guy, you karate guy, you judo guy, you boxer, you wrestler, you jujitsu guy. Hey, all come together. Let's find out who's the best. Younger people today don't appreciate how radical that was. I mean, that was like questioning the Pope. That was like breaking dogma to do that. because people said, well, I wonder what would happen. And there in the old days, judo, Gene LaBelle. And I remember, okay, the summer between my sophomore and junior year of high school, I went on a little walkabout, like before the movie Crocodile Dundee. I went on a walkabout and I wandered around the country and caught buses and hitchhiked. And I wound up I wanted to see Canada. And I wound up in the basement of Joe Pazendak. I stayed with him and I was 16 years old. He was an old catch wrestler. He's predates. He was kind of a contemporary of Luthez, and he predates Vern Gagne by a lot. And he showed me. I tried to learn from him, and he told me. He said, in the old days, Joe Louis was out of money, and he would referee wrestling matches because the IRS, just hacked him real bad and for back taxes and things, and he owed money, and because the IRS tax code kind of chewed him up. And I said, and he would, wrestling was is predetermined, but they kind of, some of those guys really could shoot. And Joe Louis, and he said, Joe Louis, the two wrestlers would get in an argument with him, and Joe Louis would put up his fists, and the wrestler would back down and go, oh, and the crowd just loved it, and they'd eat it up. And I said to Joe, I go, well, Joe Louis was old, but he could probably still hit. And he said, any wrestler there could put him in his hip pocket. And I said, really? He said, they had a rule that anybody that touched Joe Louis would be banned forever, never wrestle again, and all that. And I said, really? Why'd they have to do that? He said, can you imagine one of these wrestlers that said, yeah, I broke Joe Louis's jaw, and tries to get over and, do that. So even back then, there was that argument, about wrestlers and boxers, but no one actually tested it. They were not scientific enough to just go out and have a match. It was all speculation. It's so funny to me. As I said, it goes back 2,000 years to Aristotle. He would claim something, no one actually put it to test. That's why we have to be scientists and actually test and see what these leg locks do, and see what I'm doing leg locks to black belts in the gym that they haven't seen before. It's crazy because people sometimes they'll do tournaments, no leg locks or no this or that. And judo now has changed all its rules. So because wrestlers are going in and dominating. So instead of learning to handle some of the moves that wrestlers do, because in Hawaii, we have a very good situation where judo is a high school sport. So we have kids that do, say, football, then they go into the winter sport of wrestling, and then they go into the spring sport of judo. So
that's awesome, actually.
Yeah, so in Hawaii, the wrestlers get 3 months of wrestling at high school level with 50, 60 matches. And then they go to judo for 2 or 3 months and get 50, 60 matches. So they really get a lot of grappling time. But the judo now the national judo has changed their rules. So wrestlers can't kind of use the same move, and they've altered that a bit.
Yeah, it's kind of heartbreaking because there's a lot of kind of cool old judo techniques that are going to be lost, I think, in a generation or so, because you always train for whatever the competition is, because that's, the way the sports work. Or even like if you own a dojo or whatever, you want to have the medals and the trophies. And so
you got to have them on the wall. And go on.
No, I was just going to say, if the technique will not get you that medal, even if it's a valid technique for self-defense, you're probably not going to train it as hard, and it's a real shame, because we've seen, like you mentioned, leg locks, it kind of goes through like waves, where there was probably a very sophisticated leg lock game, back in the day. And then for various reasons, it disappeared. Obviously people could get injured, so there's some risk, but it's a shame that I feel like historically, we often go through phases of having to reinvent the wheel because we've lost some like important information that some guys had back in the day, but for whatever rules or whatever, we've lost.
Well, and a lot of that's and I remember Joe Pazendak said to me, because he was so old, he didn't like the rule that you can't lock your hands in high school wrestling and folk style. And that rule was put in place so obviously the match wouldn't be boring and the kid, a guy can get up and it'd be a little more entertaining. And he said, by putting that rule in, now nobody knows how to get out from the bottom. And if you'd had that rule, people would have been forced to learn how to get away with the class hand. And then in freestyle today, you're coaching a kid, like you're having a kid come from folk style to freestyle. You say, well, don't get up. There's no point for escaping. And if you get taken back down, the guy gets another point. So the escape, nobody in freestyle wrestling knows how to, if we had a combat situation and a great freestyle wrestler got taken down, who had only done freestyle, how would he get away? There's no point for escaping. Nobody, they just sit there parterre and they wait for the referee to put them back up after 10 seconds. So that's completely ruins that aspect of self-defense. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
You could have some great Olympic wrestlers from other countries who might have great body control, but they don't have that necessary mat control. And I've watched that. I've watched kids that are real good at jiu-jitsu maybe start wrestling. And it's funny, they get tore up in freestyle, but they do better in folk style in the beginning because it's kind of closer to jiu-jitsu, the combat things. And like you said, with the leg locks, and I know that leg lock because Japan was ahead of leg locks. And they had good leg locks when I was fighting Pancrase, and then the Japanese were really good at them. And then Frank Shamrock with the Lion's Den really got, and Ken Shamrock, but Frank was probably, I think, a little even better, got really smooth at putting on those heel hooks. And he put out like 4 guys, like boom, boom, boom. Like, and in Japan at that time, the fighters were professional fighters that were like employees of the company, and they would fight each other kind of like NBA players are members of the team. And you'd have, the Boston Celtics fight the Los Angeles Lakers, this week. But suddenly all those guys went out, and they didn't outlaw them, but they got close to that where they were not going to have heel hooks anymore because it was too damaging. Because of that, it took them out. So one of the solutions immediately is, well, don't make that move illegal. I think that also happens like in neck cranks, the old-fashioned can opener in jiu-jitsu. If you just bend down and grab the top of someone's head and curl it to you when they got you in the guard, it won't ever submit a good guy, but it sure makes a good guy like I got to let go. Or the slam in jiu-jitsu now, where if somebody wraps the guard around me and I can just pick them up and slam on their head, which we've seen that happen in the UFC a few times, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's illegal in any submission things, but you don't see the guards anymore in UFC where they're allowed to pick somebody up and slam, because that pick up and slam has kind of been worthless. And I would guarantee if in submission tournaments, the pick up and slam was allowed, you would see an entirely different game. The only reason half the people's guards work in pure submission tournaments is because that pick up and slam is outlawed. The only reason you have people careless with their legs is, well, we're not going to do any heel hooks or leg locks or any, those. So you're correct it's a fine line, because I completely think the combat sports should be as safe as possible, and we absolutely should not be injuring people. We should be doing it as much as we can, but it also should be authentic, where I can't say this is a good move because it works only because your counter is illegal.
Well, we talk about this a lot actually on the podcast, of how getting the balance right is so difficult, because you're right. You want to have as much authenticity as possible, but you also want to stay healthy. If I get injured or I injure my training partner, I can't train anymore, and I'm actually more vulnerable. If my goal is to be safer on the street, let's say, but now all of a sudden my leg is jacked up for 6 months, guess what? Or if, let's say, I'm permanently jacked in some way, because some of these moves will permanently debilitate you. And I was just thinking about how, like, you're talking about karate movies back. They always used to talk about how they're like, at least this is maybe like a fictional cliche, but where they were a lot more selective about the students that they let in. They'd go through some type of a test or some kind of a thing and basically, to me, it's to kind of make sure, this person isn't going to be an asshole and hurt my other students. Because if I'm going to give you basically a loaded gun of a technique, Like I think
Mhm.
of, there's certain moves like, Tony's front face lock that
Oh,
could be it for whoever's on the receiving end if someone's reckless with it. And so I kind of understand holding back on some of the information. Like maybe, if you're jujitsu school, maybe the first 6 months I don't give you leg locks because I want to see how hard you roll. Like how hard are you going to, put on a Kimura? Because if you're going 100% for it and you don't care about your partner, well, then maybe you're not ready for heel hooks because, it's less forgiving. But if I can see, I mean, I think they've gone to the too far to the other side where, and I think this might be changing, but I mean, fairly recently, certain schools are still waiting till you have your brown belt, which for a lot of average athletes, that's at least 8 years in, maybe. It's like, gosh, at that point, you've developed habits of not watching your legs. I have a coworker who's a brown belt, and he would normally compete every year. And when he became a brown belt, he stopped competing because he's like, I am not ready for people to put leg locks on me, like to train himself, to relearn his game, to
mhm.
protect his legs. I mean, he's got 8 years of programming where he didn't have to worry about that. And so to me, I think there's a balancing point. And I think as martial artists or as combat athletes, I don't think there's a right answer. I think it's always kind of like, yeah, how close can we get to the line? You know, and I know like in Tony's perspective, he wants to take it as close to the line as possible. Like he would love it where if we could train with some of the lower level rips where it's not that'll get you thrown out of another school for kind of being a bad sport, but that's part
Mhm.
of the game too. That's part of the history. But a lot of people don't want to train like that. And again, you have to know you got a training partner who's not going to get reckless with you. So I get your point, and it's tough because if you take things out for safety, you're sacrificing. It's a trade-off, and I think a lot of times we get it wrong we too far on the side of safety, or and it's hard because obviously you have a school with 100 students. It's hard to scrutinize everybody to know that everybody's going to be safe at the end of the day. And yeah, it's tough, especially like I was thinking about like high school coaches with kids. I mean, you got kids coming in, you've got to take care of them, and so I'm sure that's kind of how things evolved the way they did. But sometimes it's too far. So it's almost like we've had to relearn a lot of the lessons of the past. And like you said, um, do this scientifically. I mean, fortunately, I was thinking about Tony's is like, he's one of the links to the past as far as some of the techniques. I mean, that's one of the exciting things for me about his stuff is that it's like some of those harder techniques from the past that were censored out of, amateur wrestling and professional wrestling. Uh, they're still out there. There are not many people learning them and practicing them, but it's like,
Yeah.
it would be a shame if we didn't have people taking them to the next generation.
Yeah, that's funny because I have a 13-year-old who's pretty physically impressive, and I said I've got to get him out there to Tony before too long because first of all, it's hard for a dad to teach their kid, and I want to be a dad, in there because it's interesting because I'll tell you this story and then I'll respond. Well, I'll respond first to what you said earlier. You're absolutely right. And I was in because I had the IF Academy and I called my system Integrated Fighting, IF Academy. And it truly meant integrated. I meant integrate means to bring all the parts together to make whole. And I wanted to integrate all of the all the leg. I wanted all the kicks of Muay Thai, but I wanted a hand stance of boxing. I wanted all the submissions of catch wrestling. I wanted all the upper body submissions of jiu-jitsu. I wanted to bring that all together in a cohesive, whole fighting system. And I said, when I met Tony, he was probably as close to anybody. I was like, yeah, that's exactly right. It's funny, Tony and I are real, he likes jazz. I like jazz. There's so many similarities between us on that. And he's one of the few guys I'm like, wow, I didn't know that. I want to learn that. And I still use some moves and I credit him. But when I had my school and I was fortunate because I never had to make money and go get my 100 students and sign contracts and do that because I was always doing other stuff. So I kind of did it otherwise. And I've had 5-6 UFC veterans in the room at the same time with a 60-year-old man and a 10-year-old kid. And I had a big barn with a huge amount of mats. I had a barn with a big loft in the upstairs, and I had that matted with all the mats from Anderson University when they dropped their wrestling program, Anderson College, whatever one it was, and they dropped, and I had full mats, and I had punching bags, and I got to work with things and people, and I put, like I said earlier, I had moves, you stand up these, and I laminated the piece of paper, computer printout, and I put them on the wall, so I didn't hold anything back. But I said this: you are 100% responsible for your partner's safety. If you hurt somebody, it's your fault. If they didn't tap and you kept going and you hurt them, it's your fault. If you put on a heel hook and they didn't tap and you injured them, it's your fault. They're a dumbass and didn't tap, but it's still your fault. If you put on a neck crank and they don't tap, it isn't their responsibility to tap. It's your responsibility to not hurt them. And if anybody hurts somebody, I break their face. I would, it was not tolerated. And I said, check your ego at the door. You come in here and you don't hurt anybody. And if somebody, and there's no ego. So it's not like, well, this ass, and I would have sometimes people say, man, I had him 4 times and he wouldn't tap. I'm like, well, he's not going to be back because he's an egomaniac who can't tap. And I also did this. Somebody roll with me and they put me in a triangle, and I'd always let, moves go, because I always wanted to learn how to get out of moves. So I always let people get me in things, and they get 90% of the way done, and then I'd start fighting,
Uh-huh.
And I'd say, gee whiz, I tap for everybody in here. If you are just, because it's very easy for a good wrestler positionist to never get in trouble. What is he learning? And I say, start out, okay, you a guy that is a level 8, and he's fighting a guy that's a level 5. Why does the level 5 guy start with a cross mount and have halfway, a Kimura? Now go. Get the guy where they're kind of starting level, but don't, first of all, you got to clear out that ego of, oh, I never tap for anybody. That's bullshit. Rickson did that. I never tap. Bullshit. That's your dude. And Rickson's a good guy. I'm not just, you want to, I had a kid, long, about 6'3", and I was talking to somebody, and he tried this choke on me like 4 or 5 times. He wasn't doing it right. And then people keep calling my phone, so I'm having to swipe away from them. Sorry about that. And this other guy who's a black belt was talking to him, and he finally did it. And I was talking, he caught my larynx right under there. I almost broke it like a plum. And I tapped. I was like, good. But that's nothing shameful to happen. So I think the solution to that is, first, everybody taps at some time. It's not like you have your elite that never tap, and your black belts never get tapped by a brown belt, and your brown belts never get tapped by a purple belt. That's setting up a fragile house of cards that will fall apart. Secondly, you don't hurt anybody. It's not the person's responsibility to tap. It's your responsibility. We're in practice now. You're all making each other better. You cannot hurt somebody. I will many times be at a strange school, and because I jump in with I'll go with everybody, and I'll go to a strange school, never roll with a guy, and I've got a lot of cool little moves like Tony has, and probably some number, and I get something, and the guy didn't even know he's in danger, and I let it go. Nobody maybe even knows he was in danger. And then sometimes later on, I'll say, hey, I had this. And he's like, oh my gosh. And sometimes he's open-minded, it's like, oh, dang, thanks. That's cool. And other times, they're not so much, but that's not my problem. You're there to make yourself better. Check your ego at the door. Everybody taps everybody. It's not this matter of pride, and you don't hurt anybody. And it's not their responsibility to tap to not be hurt. It's your responsibility not to press it. And if he's so much of a dumbass and he's so arrogant and so egomaniac that he won't tap when he's in trouble, let him go. He's not worth your time. And that worked very well for me. And you know what? You can talk to people all over the world that have trained at IF Academy. They've all heard that speech, and they all like training there. And and that's what we do.
Wow, sounds great. Yeah, I know that's a great attitude because yeah, I think there are people who get locked into that mind frame, especially like the hierarchy you said.
The
And
hierarchy is horrible. It is a horrible, it's a rigid religious structure that is dumb and not conducive to flexible learning.
well, people also get afraid of taking risks, like,
Yes.
and like I've had people where like they just clam up and they know that I can't pry loose, an
Mhm.
arm or something, but they're not progressing. And if they were thinking in terms of self-defense, well, it's like, that's great, but you're very vulnerable in ways I can't take advantage of, just because you lock up. I've seen people go into a turtle position and they'll try and ride it out. And it's like, that's great that I can open, can't pry loose, I don't have a, but think about how vulnerable you are, in a real situation, you wouldn't want to stay there for more than a split second. So, but yeah, I think exactly, I've sparred, in the gym that I go at, sometimes there's girls that we roll with and I could muscle out of everything they do, if I
Right.
wanted to.
But
And,
yep.
but it's like, all right, well, let's let them get my back and see if I can, how long can they hold it? Can I get out of that now? And you're right. It's kind of you have to evolve your thinking. And I think the ego is such a big part of that. And to have a school where you encourage people to dispel that. And even like I said, as the instructor saying, hey, I tap, that
Yeah.
I get out there and I get tapped. I screw up or I'm going to take a risk because if everybody's afraid of like, let's say I've got a blue belt or a purple belt and like, oh shit, this blue belt's about to get me. And all of a sudden it turns into like 100% live situation, because
Right.
they're worried of protecting their rep. I mean, there's so many scenarios psychologically where it can just, and so diffusing that, I think, from the top down is such a great thing. And I think it would help students psychologically to take risks and evolve and get more out of their training and be safer. So yeah, I think 100% it makes a complete sense.
Yeah, I was it's the whole belt color hierarchy is causes some problem. And well here and people sometimes it's funny because you see my white belts here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I just wear a white belt. I've never progressed. Rickson, I think, offered me a blue belt back in like 94 or something. I mean, you don't the belt is nothing. I always say you're only as good as you are today. A ship does not sail on winds that blew yesterday. And I never awarded belts to, and I never thought, because when you're doing that, it becomes secondary to actually learning something. And just what you said, that just sit and stalemate someone, just a stalemate and hold and not and say, okay, they didn't tap me. Well, what did you learn? I mean, that is I was rolling with a real good black belt a couple weeks ago, and I let him take my back, and he put on he body triangled me. And I was like, wow, because I was like, I need to work on somebody body triangling me. He had nice long, legs. And boom, boom, he had a body triangle on me, and I'm working. I think I had just met him. I didn't know him at all, so I didn't do a shin lock because Tony, Tony Cecchine's got some of the best shin locks in the world, best shin lock in the world I've ever seen. And I had some others, but I didn't do it. And there's, I can even tuck my chin and grab his head and try to put the crown of my head back and cry, do it. And I you can do like and now I can't do this anymore because I'm just not flexible, but you can put their legs in figure four, they're laying and do, but I was playing with stuff and doing stuff. And then we only went 5 minutes. The gym had a 5-minute timer. So I got back with him and I let him, he got another, let him get another one on me because I wanted to work on that. Cause I don't know. I've been triangle. I don't know anybody's been able to put a body triangle on me because I'm probably fat now. And I was like, this is great. I was so happy. And I think he was probably taking a little easy on me because I was new, or we were new to each other, so he wasn't going real hard either. But it was I want to be in new positions. I want to try everything because especially a good wrestler can take a jujitsu person and just never let him have anything, but just like you said. And if I roll with a girl, and I roll with girls, I don't discriminate on any, and I'll roll. And I tell people this too in the gym. I said, throw away your muscles and just throw away your muscles and train. Just practice as if, and I do this. and this was in my goal since I was a little kid. And I thought about this because I was always pretty scientifically minded. I said, if I was fighting a clone of myself with exact same strength, exact same speed, exact same rhythm and timing and balance, exact same everything, would my move work? Because the move is superior. You know, if you had two clones and one had hooks in the back, he probably finished the match and win. You know, if you had two clones and one had, you know, a good triangle on the other, the one that got the triangle first would win. That's a good move. You aren't powering out of a triangle from your clone who has it on you. Now you might be able to power out of a triangle from a girl or a smaller guy. So I always, and I was always conscious of that. I think because I was always strong. I never really felt like anybody out-muscled me on a match. Even in college wrestling or anything, I never felt like people were really muscling me. But well, maybe Tom Erickson. He's pretty freaky strong and big. He's just so large. Also, he's.
Did you actually wrestle him, or did you just meet him, or?
Yeah, we wrestled a lot
Wow.
and trained jujitsu and stuff. And he's a great guy. And that's why I said I compliment him because he's such a freakishly impressive physical specimen, like a Bob Sapp or, you know, he's just such a freak. He's probably one of the most impressive physical specimens you ever want to see. Actually, you know who the most impressive physical specimen I ever saw was? Mark Gastineau. I when he was boxing, I boxed him, and you know we're boxing, and he was, and I just look, and I was like, shit, that's a 6'5", 275-pound gazelle. I mean, he just looks beautiful. He doesn't look like a steroidally enhanced freak. He doesn't look like he has an extra ounce of weight muscle on his frame that doesn't belong there. His body did not grow out of its natural proportions. You know, he is just like, holy smokes. He's just, that's just, and so, and just to punch it and the weight and the movement of his hands, like his forearm, you know, just like, wow. So anyway, there are those people. And he actually felt stronger than me. I never wrestled him. I just boxed with him and sparred with him and did it informally. So I got to push and shove with him a little bit. Shays, he's a lineman for the NFL, so I'm not pushing him around. But he was probably the most impressive, just raw physical specimen I've ever seen. It'd be interesting to see some people that had other comparisons on that too. But yeah, to rely on your strength against person A, and then to rely on your strength against girl B and little guy C, and then get a hold of somebody who's your clone, that's worthless. You want to fight everybody. You want to train against everybody like you are going to have to fight your clone or somebody a little better than you, a little stronger than you. And then the only, you may not be able to control how fast you are, how strong you are, your size and how tall you are and how much you weigh, but you can control how much you know and how fast you can apply a move and how smooth and seamlessly you can flow from one position to the other. That's the one thing you can control. So that's very valuable.
Yeah, and eventually our strength and everything and our speed eventually fails. We get older, and it's all that's left is your technique. And it's hard to, like, that's another thing you have to balance as a martial artist, because the instinct is there to use. And that's something I struggle with too, is that sometimes I just try and do something as fast or as strong as I can because that's what I need to, because I realize I'm going to be in trouble otherwise. But ultimately the ideal is it's all technique that wins, all strategy and all technique that wins. That's the ideal that you go for. So I want to ask you before, there's been a lot of fascinating talk, but so high school, you're already kind of wrestling at a national level sometimes. Where did you go to college? Where did you wrestle at college?
Well, I tell you what, I went to Wabash, which was a Division III school, and I picked that because I actually probably picked it because the coach came after me pretty hard, and it was a super academic. They said, "Oh, that's the Rutgers of the Midwest. That's like Ivy League for the Midwest," and I was so dumb and ignorant, or just ignorant. I because Harvard recruited me for football,
wow.
And my mom said, "Oh, you don't need to go out of state." And I'm like, "Okay, mom." And so all, and North Carolina recruited me for wrestling. They had they had this super big guy, Tab Thacker, I think, at that time, or he's like 450 or something. And I was a heavyweight. I was only about 210, and there was no limit. There was no 275-pound limit then. But I really, at that time, I thought I'm going to get a gold medal in the Olympics in wrestling. And at that time, one reason I picked, because IU is what's in the Big Ten. I wrestled their heavyweight. I could beat him, but Div 3, you could go to the nationals. You could go if you won the Div 3 nationals, you could go to the Div 1 nationals. Back then, who was the guy? Was it that won? He won 3 Div 2 titles and he won 3 Div 2 titles and 3 Div 1 titles. Was it Carl Helsberg or Helsing or somebody that he's like considered one of the greatest college wrestlers because he won 6 national NCAA titles. And he won them in the Division 2, and then he went to Division 3 and went in the pigtails of that and won that. And so I kind of went there and I wrestled, and I beat a senior won the nationals. I was a freshman. I beat him and I got the spot, and I wrestled, but another thing, a reason I went there was because the football coach said to me, because I had a tremendously frustrating football career, because I was a defensive tackle in high school and I was about 210, and that's just not a defensive tackle size in college, and I wanted to always play running back or linebacker or fullback or something like that. And I was fast. I had a real good 40 time. In high school, I could outrun all the linebackers, but I was a defensive tackle. And I got the football coach there, and the wrestling coach said, "Hey, you come here." And the football coach said, "I'll give you any position you want, and you have it. It's not that I'll give you a day tryout. You can sit there and train and keep it, learn to do this." So I was like, okay, I'll get to do the position in football I want. I get to do the wrestling. I can go to the nationals in wrestling. The school's super academic. And I was like, so that's where I went to college and wrestled on there. So that was kind of that.
People would probably kill me if I don't circle back to this. So after college, when did you meet and then roll with Rickson?
Let's see. Rickson was doing everybody's calling me.
He's probably Rickson saying, "Don't tell this story."
Yeah. No, Rickson was there was a seminar up in Chicago, and I lived in Indianapolis, so it was like a 3.5 hour drive.
Was this like 93?
Yeah, would have been like that.
I might have been there.
Okay. Well, did you saw me tie in with Rickson then?
Well, so if it's the seminar I was at, yeah, well, it was impressive in some ways because they split the class in half. It was a big gym. And I was like, I think he said anybody 185 pounds and above, Rickson was going to roll with. Everybody below was going to roll with his brown belt. I don't know if you remember.
That was his brown belts. Was it Maurice or Luis? Was his brown belt?
I don't remember the name of the guy, but I had a roll against his brown belt. And with little or no experience, and the guy was actually pretty cool with it. I think he could have destroyed me pretty quickly, but he was pretty casual about, probably because he had 50 guys to go through too, or whatever.
Right, he had to save his energy.
But so I don't remember seeing. I remember seeing a few people I knew who were bigger. I watched the people I knew wrestle, but it's so long ago I can't even remember. And I do think there's video clips of that out on YouTube. Because I've seen
this stuff. Well, and I remember I met a Pat McAfee, and I got some friends from there. There's a guy. There's a Beech Grove policeman too, because they saw me there and they mentioned it. And Beech Grove is a little suburb out of Indianapolis. So I did that seminar, and I'm learning. I'm sitting in the front, trying to learn, trying to figure everything out. And I went with him a couple times. And I pulled my leg, and the one time I said he couldn't tap me. I finally it was getting worn out. I was just tired because I was, nervous, and I didn't know how to breathe properly or any of that stuff. And you're kind of there. So after we went there, he's like, "Hey," and he gave me his pager number, because that was back before cell phones. And he said, here's my pager. You will always be able to contact me. I want you to come and train and fight and all this. So then I flew out to LA to school, and those other two belts, one was a black belt and one was a brown belt. And I believe Maurice was a brown belt in 93 and Luis was the black belt. And Rickson never rolled with me again on there. He never would roll with me. I'm like, you sucker. But Maurice and Luis did. And I believe Luis was the black belt, and they were smaller, and he taught me everything. He made me put my hands behind my back and work the guard and do everything. And my gi was soaking wet, and I put it out in the sun just so the UV lights would kill the funk and nastiness. And I stayed there and trained, I think for 1 week, maybe 10 days, and just sucked up every bit of knowledge I possibly could. Took every class from the morning to the night. And then I came back to Midwest. So I basically knew everything that black belts could do to you and would do, and I did the same thing though, but I wasn't. And I'll tell you one thing, see, I never tried. There was a point then when I could muscle those brown and black belts of his and maybe, give him a harder time than I did, but I wasn't trying to do that. It wasn't like, I tapped one of Rickson's black belts. I wanted to learn. I absolutely wanted to try to figure this out, and they were super good, super cool, super generous on all this stuff. And that was back when Rickson had those shitty green mats with the gaps in between them, his school. I've got pictures of it. And it was not I remember I went there and I was like, dang, this isn't as near as nice as any of the wrestling rooms in the Midwest. Of course, I'm sure rent in LA is 10 times what the rent is in the Midwest. So I remember going there going, Dad, these mats suck, and this place there. But I didn't say any of that, of course. I was there just to learn. And he wouldn't roll with me anymore, pretty much of that. He has a reputation to keep and all that, but he was so far ahead of his time, because at that time, like, people criticize, when the first match between Rickson Gracie and Dan Severn, Dan Severn eventually got caught in a triangle, but you know what? Dan Severn had never seen a triangle. He never worked to get out of a triangle. Let him get out of a triangle a couple times. Let him work a month, 2 or 3 weeks on that, and he won't ever get caught in it again. But the power, because I don't want somebody to miss, take a chunk of this video and say, oh, Jason was talking shit about somebody else. I'm not. And people know that I don't. But the idea that, hey, we're going to put all these people together and have them fight each other and see who comes out on top just wasn't done. The value of that was amazing. Before the first UFCs, you had people arguing death punches and one shot, one punch, one kill. I mean, I hung around black belts who believe that stuff. And they beat their knuckles on boards and shit to get these big calcium deposited knuckles. Yeah, one of my punches will just knock anybody out and all this crazy stuff. And so it was super valuable on that. I mean, the pioneering and the progression of our sport has just skyrocketed. And even now, people have gone to kicking the calf. Who thought about kicking the calf, a very small muscle, which would totally debilitate someone? Or when Khabib, I'm going to triangle their legs and come creeping up on them like that. These techniques that are constantly being pioneered are just beautiful. And there's old ones that are being lost because they've been thrown away.
Yeah, I'll kind of second what you're saying, because there are people out there who occasionally will badmouth some of the Gracies and their level of grappling, but regardless, they went out there, and I think probably their most important contribution. Oh, the other thing I was going to say is a lot of people have gone back. I think there's some judo historians now who are showing that a lot of, probably all of those techniques have existed in judo for ages. The triangle wasn't innovated by them, but I think that's besides the point. I think the point, and where they should deserve some credit, is kind of reminding the world the value of grappling in a combat situation. They were willing to get into striking matches, which is grappling. And that, like you said, for a lot of people was very theoretical. I mean, I trained at, was kind of what I would call a proto mixed martial arts school in Chicago, Degerberg Academy. where they
Yep.
were already kind of mixing karate and boxing. They kind of already realized you need multiple systems, and they were already exploring Muay Thai and things like that. So I think there are pockets, and I mean, you can even talk about Jeet Kune Do. I mean, they were at
Yeah.
least theoretically talking about mixing martial arts, but they didn't get into the ring and do it. You know, they didn't put their
Well, and that's the
literal
thing.
necks
Hoist
on the
Gracie
line.
says, "Here, try to knock my head off. I'll get in the ring, and you can try to punch me in the face." And Hoyt, nobody else had done that. And the other thing is, when anyone criticizes the Gracie's ground game, they are being unfair because they're saying this. Well, the Gracies in 93, Gracie's in 1990s would be destroyed by blah, blah in 2020. Well, okay. According to that, Jesse Owens is a punk runner, and McEnroe's a punk tennis player, and you're not comparing apples to apples. You have to compare each man in his time period with his contemporaries. And so don't say to me, well, Hoist Gracie, if he tried to get in UFC today, would be destroyed. Say to me, who else from that time period would be successful in the UFC today? That's fair. And you're right. I got choked unconscious because I went to IU. I transferred from Wabash to IU, which was a bigger school. And I was president of the jiu-jitsu club in 1983. And Matt Osman was a real good jiu-jitsu judo guy, and he choked me unconscious. Actually, no, I don't think it was a triangle choke. It was a gi choke, but it was one of those, churning gi chokes from judo. Choked me unconscious. I was whipped. I was a good wrestler, good college wrestler, coming after him and giving him all kinds of trouble. And he was a real good judo guy and jiu-jitsu guy. And we had gis on, and he got that collar choke on me, and I went out. I started getting lightheaded, and he stopped, and he was like, and he even thought he might have killed me and damaged me because he hadn't choked that many people out. We didn't realize, because he kind of thought choking. So even back then, there were those moves. So, and John Lang was a black belt, full contact karate guy, and I was boxing Golden Gloves, and I was practicing karate with him. And he said, I ought to go do the Golden Gloves. He went to the Golden Gloves and got his ass kicked, just his nose blasted over his face. But guess what? He did it. No other karate guy in the state would. And we were talking and stuff, and he didn't. It's like, oh, I learned something, So yeah, there was that mixture, but it was so rare. And now it's pretty common, but it's almost like people now are trying to hoard up the knowledge and put it in little pockets and try to compartmentalize it.
Hey, so how did you first find out about Tony?
Oh man, I don't even know. I think I used to go up to Bob Shermer's and Brian Gassaway and Shoney Carter and all those guys, because I trained with Shoney Carter, and because he was very knowledgeable. So I trained if you were within a 2-day drive or a 1-day drive of me, I would come out and train with you. And I don't even know how I first connected with him. I think I got up to Chicago and heard somebody from somebody. And that kind of happens. Like, for example, Jake Clark was out here in Hawaii, and he was an alternate for the 2016 Olympics and 2020 Olympics. And BJ Penn moved him out to Hawaii to train him for fighting, because he was a great wrestler, and he gave him a real good look of what Matt Hughes would be like or something like that, And so I'm at the UFC gym here, and I'm rolling with people, and they go, and then they're doing pretty good. And they go, hey, you need to roll with Jake. I'm like, oh, who's Jake? And like, I don't know, So like a month later, this guy in the locker room's like, hey, are you Jason Godwise? I'm like, yeah. And he goes, are you Jake Clark? And I go, yeah. So sometimes people just direct you to each other, So that's how I met him. And I think I only bring that up because I think that's how I met Tony. It's like somebody says, hey, you need to meet Tony. You're really into this stuff, and Tony Cecchine's really into this stuff. You guys ought to meet. So I think it was one of those things. And I don't know if I looked him up or I think I probably looked him up. I don't know if he looked me up. And then one of those things like, wow, I start picking his brain and he's picking my brain. And I'm like, and I thought, wow, this guy really knows his stuff. And so and it's really unfortunate because it always seemed like our schedules, we weren't that far apart. We were only about a 3-hour drive apart, but I didn't get up there. I went up there. I probably went up to Chicago and drove up to Tony's to just see him, I don't know, 3 or 4 times. And that's about it. It's really unfortunate. Every time, I'd go up to his house and we just, it was one of those things where wherever we would end up talking till 2 a.m. It was one of those things where an hour or 2 hours isn't enough. So it was like, I'd see him in the morning and we would talk and exchange information, and it would go. And he's some people, some people top out, after some people, you have what they call a 5-minute conversation. How's the weather? It's good. And that's about all they got. They're kind of shallow. And then other people, you're like, well, what's this? And, what do you think? And then you're pretty, you talk a little bit more, and then you're done after 5 minutes, and you're done after about an hour, they're saying the same story. They're kind of a one-trick pony. But Tony's a guy that you can talk to, and you never plumb the depth of where, you never get to the bottom of where he's at. You've never exhausted the supply of information. And it doesn't have to be just wrestling. It can be, Tony's a guy you can talk about boxing. You can go back to John L. Sullivan, and you can see how Corbett won the title, then Fitzsimmons, and he'll explain what happened in those matches. And then, he can talk about when Hart got and then you talk about wrestlers, and you talk about Gamma or Hackenschmidt or Gotch, or, I was like, yeah, I worked out on the workout bench and Frank Gotch's workout bench. I got to do when you talk, because I told him about that. He's like, yeah, he knew what that was. And then you talk, and then, jazz, you talk about the music here. You can talk about a 57 Chevy, a flathead Ford. It's just, whatever. Oh, the valves. So Tony's a guy that just has an insane amount of knowledge of different things. And he's always been curious. So it's always been such an insane pleasure to talk to him because it's so stimulating.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I think this podcast is such a great format for him, because he just will not shut up. No, but really, I mean, he's got the Italian gift for gab, and he really, like I said, he's a very charismatic guy and knows a ton of stuff. If he's interested in it, he knows it very deeply, whether it's music or whatever.
That's funny about Tony, because sometimes we're out on the streets of Chicago, and Tony always talks very intelligently, and he's, you're right. He talks you're like, wow, this guy really knows what's going on. However, you get in an Italian neighborhood with a couple of Italian girls that are like, hey, what you do? And Tony's like, hey, how's it going? Yeah, you got the big scruffy balls to talk to me like that. And it's like, whoa, it's like, what? Is there a split personality there? So you talk about the Italian gift for gab, but we get into some little, like in Indianapolis, there's a couple of those that we have Italian Fest and a couple old Italian neighborhoods, but they're getting destroyed now. They're gone, they're disappearing. But it's funny, in a couple of occasions I've seen that, and I'm like, wow, you just went into Tony Italian mode real quick.
He went full Goomba.
Yeah, he did. He was like, what? You were just talking to me a second ago, and now.
Well, that is funny, because he can like range the gamut, like he can go, full Goomba or thug, like sometimes he can be articulate and very high-minded, and other times he'll say things you'll be like, whoa, that's
like, hey, are you parking? Like, hey, you almost scraped my car. And it's like Tony. So it's like The Sopranos or something. It's like, so it's funny. I've seen Tony do that. And that happens in Hawaii. You'll have areas where they speak pretty strong pidgin, and you'll be talking to a Yale grad, and he's speaking to this, and then boom, he'll go into pidgin and like, what? So that happens here sometimes, but I've seen it happen personally, from Tony a few times.
Well, dude, it's been super cool talking to you. It's been really enlightening. I didn't know anything about, honestly, you, but it's got tons. Clearly, you've been like, it seems like you've trained with everybody and anybody who's got a name. It seems like you got a real passion for going out there and seeking knowledge, and that's awesome. This was a great talk, man.
And I stayed on good terms with everybody, and I'll tell you what, everybody out there will say, Jason's never cheated nobody. He's never lied. He's never, so I've stayed in good terms with everybody, and that helps. Just if you're not a jackass, most people in the world are pretty kind and are generous hearted. I believe in the intrinsic goodness of human beings. I really do. It's only when they get in groups and corporations and governments that they cause problems.
Hey, so do you have a school? Do you have stuff to plug?
No, I'm just an old man out here in Hawaii doing my stuff. So
Just enjoying the weather.
Enjoying life. People come to train with me sometimes, but they all know who I am and they come whatever. I'm pretty but yeah, I'm just doing my thing out here. I'm blessed beyond belief. I got the best wife in the world, best kids in the world, best place in the world, best friends in the world, and healthy and happy and doing well.
Awesome, man. Well, this was, like I said, a great talk. I think we could, at least I could hear you talk about all those other people you've trained with for hours probably. So I think we should definitely do part 2 if you're willing. Obviously, we'll give you a break maybe, but when Tony's available, we'll schedule a part 2 down the road, because I'd like to hear you two guys relay your stories together. I think that'd be super awesome. I think everybody would love to hear that. Yeah, again, thanks for making a great show. It was fascinating stuff. And yeah, just enjoy the weather out there.
All right.
And we'll be talking soon.
All right, bye.
I'm just going to pause it here. Okay.
Okay.